From Montana's news leader, this is the MTN 530 News.
Hello, everyone. I'm Russ Riesinger. Thanks for joining us tonight from the north entrance to Yellowstone National Park as we celebrate the 150th anniversary of America's oldest national park. It was on this date back in 1872 that President Ulysses S. Grant signed the National Yellowstone Protection Act into law. Of course, much of the park still looks exactly like it did way back then, but a lot has also changed. That's where we begin tonight with MTN's Casey Conlon.
In the summer, this would be an impossible find, an empty boardwalk overlooking Mammoth Hot Springs here inside Yellowstone National Park. Last year, the park set an all-time attendance record. Nearly 5 million people came through the gates, mostly between May and September, and it started to raise some questions on how many more this park can handle and if they should go to a reservation or timed entry system like many others, including Glacier, have started.
I would never come in the summer.
And Deborah Rigg isn't alone. Most of the people in Yellowstone on this winter day said they were here because most others aren't.
One of the things we like to do when we travel is come during times when there's not so many people.
What I've seen with the line of cars, the crowds of people, just deters me.
Yellowstone keeps yearly attendance records going all the way back to 1904. That year, 13,727 visited the park. By comparison, more than 1 million people visited in just July of 2021. It's the first time the park has ever eclipsed 1 million in a single month.
Yeah, it is very concerning.
Yellowstone Superintendent Cam Shawley spoke at a virtual event in January addressing some of the park's current plans for the surge.
We're working on quite a few microgeographic visitor management actions. Obviously, as visitation goes up, those actions will need to be more aggressive.
One of the plans includes shuttle buses to reduce traffic to some of Yellowstone's busiest spots. Alaska's Denali National Park has operated a similar system for decades.
You make reservations to go into the park by bus because otherwise the road would be dusty, you couldn't see any wildlife, and it wouldn't work well.
Denali is one of many parks now requiring reservations for at least some of its attractions. Others include some of the country's most popular, including Zion and Arches in Utah, Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, Acadia in Maine, and starting this year, Yosemite in California. For the second straight year, you'll also need a reservation to drive the Going to the Sun Road in Glacier. Reservations start Wednesday, by the way.
I hate to think of a reservation system that would exclude people or delay them having the experience. I would hope there'd be some kind of system where you could regulate the number of people that are in the park at one time.
A final part of the equation to consider, what are record numbers of humans doing to the natural Yellowstone habitat?
Climate change, obviously, is probably the single biggest threat to Yellowstone.
Yellowstone is so iconic because it is a vast natural area that can be kind of a last refuge for some of these species. And so I think it's very important to manage the park in a way that we can be protective of those species.
It's the #1 issue the park will face over its next 150 years. Casey Conlon, MTN News.
Tonight, there is renewed interest to fix a legal loophole that centers around a 50-square-mile sliver of land here in Yellowstone National Park where a person could presumably get away with murder. MTN's Andrea Lutz has more on that.
Most know Yellowstone National Park for its beauty and untouched nature. It's a place of wonder, attracting many every year. But its boundaries and how they're drawn, peculiar, considering this.
It would be horrifying if someone committed a crime thinking that this would work.
17 years ago, Michigan law professor Brian Kalt stumbled upon a jurisdictional loophole that could, in theory, allow the federal government to dismiss charges against someone who committed a crime in the Idaho portion of the park.
The second part of the loophole is more complicated.
And here's why. The zone of death is centered around this tiny section of Yellowstone National Park.
It's in the extreme southwest part of Yellowstone.
Most of the park sits in Wyoming, roughly 9% in Montana, and this 1% in Idaho. When the park was created in 1872, none of its adjoining states were yet established. So Congress ended up putting the entire park in the hands of the District of Wyoming. Well, the Sixth Amendment requires a jury be drawn from the state and district where the crime took place. But if a crime was committed here in Idaho, there's no jury pool. No one lives there.
Because of the way Congress drew the district lines all weird here, there's no way to get a proper jury. That's ridiculous, but and it would be easy to fix. But until they do, it sits there as at least potentially an argument that someone who commits a crime there would have to go free.
To our knowledge, the theory hasn't yet been tested. Colt hopes his discovery of this legal loophole won't actually incentivize people to test it out.
Let's hope that they fix it, that they close the loophole, but if they don't, let's hope that that streak continues.
But he says it's gonna take a bigger movement than just his article to do so.
Governor and escort.
Enter the Idaho House of Representatives, where during this session, a Boise lawmaker introduced legislation to close the loophole on the zone of death.
I asked Congress to fix it. I've been asking them to fix it for 17 years. They don't pay any attention to me. But if Idaho asked them to do it, that might actually get us.
Adventure seekers often find themselves searching for the places virtually untouched by civilization.
Probably the least visited part of the park, because there just aren't that many people there.
But in the off chance criminals are looking for it too, Colt hopes change can happen before anyone tries to actually test the legal theory.
There's a lot of interesting theories that people have had about how to get away with murder. This is just one of them.
In Billings, Andrea Lutz, MTN News.
American novelist William Stanger called the national park system America's best idea. Later, Ken Burns made that quote famous in his film on the national parks. But do you know who came up with the idea for a national park? MTN's John Shearer explains.
It's a compelling tale. In 1870, a group of explorers who were gathered around a campfire near the junction of the Firehole and Gibbon Rivers are so moved by what they've seen in the Yellowstone region that they propose preserving it as a national park. What a truly American story. In fact, it's such a great story that the Park Service used to share it all the way through the 1960s. The only problem? It's just not true.
So, you know, there's kind of a myth that they sat around a campfire and they said, hey, let's preserve this as a national park, and went on their merry way.
Historian Lee Whittlesey reviewed 20 first-hand accounts left by members of that Washburn expedition into Yellowstone. Only 4 left diary entries for the night when the campfire story is supposed to have happened. None of them mentioned the discussion or the idea. In fact, it wasn't until 35 years later that Yellowstone explorer and the park's first superintendent, Philetus Norris, described the campfire story, attributing the idea to Cornelius Hedges. Now, that's not to say that Norris and others on the trip didn't embrace the idea of a national park that would eventually lead to creation of Yellowstone and this famous arch. It's just that the thought did not spring up around a nostalgic campfire in the center of Yellowstone.
I think that they did have some discussions about what it would look like to maybe not leave this open to settlement, but it was kind of over the following year that those men really kind of evolved their thinking about this.
It took some time for the national park idea to bubble up. During the year after the expedition returned to Helena, more than 15 articles and letters appeared, And not even mentioned the great idea expedition members supposedly pledged to champion as they sat around the campfire. But once the idea did surface and was promoted by Norris, Hedges, and the others, it raced through the national consciousness like a wildfire in the West. Less than 2 years later, in 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the law creating the park. In Mammoth, at Yellowstone National Park, I'm John Shearer, MTN News.
Well, most of Yellowstone National Park is actually in Wyoming, not Montana, but Montana is home to 3 of the park's 5 entrances. This is the only one that remains open year-round. There's a reason for that, because the park gets a whole lot of snow. For more now, we want to send it back to Q2 Chief Meteorologist Ed McIntosh in the studio.
And the snow on the ground is a reminder that weather is a big part of Yellowstone National Park. We can go from extended periods of warm and dry weather, seldom hot because of the elevation, to cold and snow pretty much any time of the year. And that's led to one of the great traditions at Yellowstone. According to the story, there was a huge snowstorm that happened in August, and it trapped travelers at Old Faithful Inn. They decided to make the best of it, and they started a Christmas celebration. And now every year, all the inns across Yellowstone National Park will decorate for the holidays, sing Christmas carols, hand out Christmas cookies, and it all culminates on August 25th, Christmas in August. And while we may not have reindeer that show up, there could be some other visitors. The weather's up in just a few minutes.
We'll get back out to Yellowstone in just a moment, but first we want to catch you up on today's news in Yellowstone County. Billings police were called to the scene of yet another shooting, this time on the city's south side. Police say a 37-year-old man from Billings was found shot around 1 this afternoon in the 400 block of South 32nd Street. He was rushed to the hospital. About an hour later, officers could still be seen taking photos of a pair of clothes dropped in the street. Billings police have responded to at least 7 shootings and 3 stabbings since the start of the year. Police Chief Rich St. John will field questions from the public about the spike in crime at a public forum tonight. We'll bring you the full story tonight at 10. If your student rides the school bus in Billings, a big change happens tomorrow. Billings Public Schools will be lifting the mask requirement on all buses and vans operated by public or private school systems. School District 2 removed the mandate for masks inside schools just over 2 weeks ago. As of now, the Billings Met Transit system still requires the use of face coverings. With a record 4.8 million visitors last year, the park's medical crews stay busy, as you might imagine. Coming up next, we're going to hear about the work that they do. But before we go to the break, we want to share some interesting facts from Yellowstone's many years of record keeping.
The MTN 530 News continues right after this. From Montana's news leader, you're watching the MTN 530 News.
From visitors gored by bison to thermal burns, from geysers and hot pots, first responders here in Yellowstone Park have seen it all. And as I found out, many of those accidents happen far off the beaten path.
I think the remote nature of the park is definitely the first challenge that I noticed.
When someone falls ill or suffers injury, the Mammoth Clinic can be as beautiful a sight for them as any other in Yellowstone Park.
I like to call myself the Yellowstone doctor. I'm the only full-time physician working in the park.
Winter days are typically pretty slow at the clinic, but it's a different story when the park is bustling with tourists. With the nearest hospital 52 miles away, Dr. Linda Haney has to be ready for it all, from primary care to emergencies.
Some of the snowmobile accidents that we get from Cook City are pretty impressive and concerning, but people have done very well.
And then there's the unusual things that you probably wouldn't see anywhere else.
but most of those get flown out, especially bison gorings those wounds tend to be very dirty and need surgical debridement. So often those are triaged and helicopters will come in and fly them, sometimes out to Ermac because it's the biggest hospital that's closest to the center of the park.
Fortunately, those incidents are rare, but Haney says they do see a lot of heart attacks and strokes that may be exasperated by the park's high elevation.
I've said, I think we should have a sign that says it's a high elevation adventure. You know, those with cardiac and respiratory issues, be cautious. See quite a diversity of patients. We also see people from all sorts of different countries and languages, so it's a very diverse group. But having been trained in family practice, I love the variety, and it's hard to beat the variety that we see here.
Still to come on this special edition celebrating Yellowstone National Park's 150th anniversary, how the park's success is giving a big boost to a nearby Wyoming town. You're watching the MTN 530 News on Q2.
If you're looking for an entrance to Yellowstone National Park that has a decidedly western flair, the Eastgate entrance town of Cody, Wyoming might be the destination for you. The community saw a huge boom in tourism in 2021 with the record number of visitors to the park, and it's all hands on deck preparing for next season.
I mean, we were busy from the day the gate opened.
The COVID-19 pandemic has meant change across the board, including a change in tourist habits. That means peak season at Yellowstone might be widening.
2020 was horrid. With COVID, it really hurt a lot. We're about 40%, but last year we set record numbers. So we had more sold out nights than ever before.
During the summer months, 300 people can pack the Cody Cattle Company for dinner and a country music show. Owner Greg Pendley said the park draws people to town, but the past few years have seen more people staying to explore Cody.
I think the park is still by far the draw, but Cody itself has become more of a destination, and I'm really happy and proud of the town for that.
In downtown Cody, businesses were opening during this pandemic, so that says a lot. I don't know of any downtown that closed.
Moni's Boutique had a far better 2021 compared to 2020, proof that visitors continued to visit Yellowstone and its gateway communities, even despite the pandemic.
I mean, most of the time we're asking about them when people come through the door. Where are you from? What brings you here? But it seems like a lot of them wanted to know about us, how we were doing, how we were holding up. Because a lot of the people came from places that were completely closed and businesses were closing.
But even here, there have been challenges, specifically hiring staff. Many Cody businesses rely on part-time college students or foreign visa workers to help during peak times, but the off-season has been difficult.
For the first time, for a lot of restaurant owners locally, they had to make the tough decision to close 2 days a week, all season long.
But even so, you can bet the crowds will return this season like clockwork. Yellowstone's still drawing them here, even in a pandemic. So if you're traveling to Cody this summer, pack your patience and book early. Word is in January that RV campground reservations were already filling up for the summer. Reporting in Cody, Wyoming, Mitch Laggy, MTN News.
Well, thanks for joining us for this 150th anniversary special from Yellowstone National Park. Before we leave you tonight, we want to say happy birthday in the best way possible. Over the past week, we've asked you, our viewers, to share your favorite memories and photos from past visits to Yellowstone, and you delivered. On behalf of myself and the rest of the MTN crew, we leave you with some of those memories. Hope you have a good night from Yellowstone National Park.